Are state fraud laws punishing Kansans for honest mistakes? Plus, the vote that could swing a Senate race. Or not. And the fight over pushing back to school. A political hot potato tossed around the state. Where will it land? That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week.
Southwest National Bank has proudly served Wichita and its surrounding communities for over 100 years. We are happy to support KPTS, Public Television for Kansas.
Welcome to Kansas Week. I'm your host, Pilar Pedraza. From local school districts to the governor, the State Board of Education, and then back to your child's school board, the fight over who should make this year's difficult decision of when to start school this fall has been literally all over the Kansas map, as KAKE's Eli Higgins and I showed you this week.
It was all about flexibility and local control for me.
The timeline is different for every community and every school board.
No matter their feelings about the governor's order to delay the start of school, just about every member of the State Board of Education cited local control as something they believe in. For some, it was the deciding factor. Others concluded the COVID-19 pandemic took precedence.
The pandemic is not local. The pandemic will go across county lines. It goes across state lines.
Board members said they based their final decision on the best interests of the students. Those opposing the governor's order worried about the increasing learning gap and other effects of being out of school for so long. Those supporting the governor said protecting student health was most important.
My concern is this is going to be an ongoing issue, and it's not going to go away easily.
That left the decision in the hands of local school boards once again.
Science over politics.
Twice this week, Wichita teachers rallied to urge the Wichita Board of Education to follow the CDC's guidelines on reopening, including a delayed start. Thursday, Wichita Public Schools began setting the stage for a return to school, from asking for calendar options that start after Labor Day to offering parents a choice between in-person classes and remote learning. The board also voted on a matrix that would decide when all school buildings would have to close and the district would have to move to a 100% teach-from-home model.
We'll pay attention to our health department. We'll take their recommendations. If we continue to climb as we are now, we may have to do that.
We're going to look at numbers in terms of cases. We're going to look at our ability to handle the situation, and that comes down to the hospital information. We're going to look at, of course, the curve.
It's a hot topic all across the state. Should school be delayed? Parents like Lauren Burns say yes.
I think it's smart to just, put more measures in place and give it a little bit of time to figure things out.
But grandparents like Giche Magana disagree.
I don't think that's right. I think the kids are prepared to go back to school.
Thursday, the Wichita School Board recommended starting the next school year after Labor Day, embracing Governor Kelly's executive order just one day after the Kansas Board of Education rejected it, putting the decision back in the hands of each district. School Board President Cheryl Logan says it's one of the toughest decisions she's had to make.
This is right up at the top because we're talking about safety for kids.
And joining me this week to discuss this and more, and there's a lot to unpack here, we have Dr. Russell Arbin Fox, a political scientist from Friends University, joining me here on the desk. And joining us by Skype, Sherman Smith with the brand new Kansas Reflector. Thank you both so much for being here. Sherman, I'm going to start with you. I know you and I have both covered what's been going on in Topeka quite a bit over the last year or so, longer than that really. As we look at this tossing of the political hot potato back and forth, is it really more about politics, or is it truly a concern with that local control that so many spoke about?
What are you think seeing? It's a little bit of both. There's always politics involved, and there seems to be some maneuvering here from the governor's administration to pin the blame on anything that happens on those who thwart her orders. And from the Republican side, some political play to make this an issue about local control or freedom, those sort of things. And both of those kind of diverge from the central point. And I think everybody agrees that they want what's best for the children and the state.
Hey, it's certainly a push for what's best for the children in the state, and yet a lot of differing opinions there.
Yeah, the argument about local control is one that has been present in Kansas politics for many years. It's been a central part of all sorts of debates across American history. Just recently within Kansas politics, there's been arguments about whether cities ought to be able to implement different gun control regulations, concealed carry regulations, in contrast to the policies that the state has laid down. The state government has taken away from cities their ability to do that. I would tend to fall on the side of those that say that when you're talking about a contagious disease, you're talking about something whose externalities, whose consequences really can't be contained within a local environment. And consequently, that maybe local control, allowing school districts to make these decisions for themselves, isn't necessarily the best approach. In any case, though, we have seen USD 259 here in Wichita go along with the governor's order. Hayesville has said they're going to be going along. There's some indication that the Newton and the Derby school boards are going to be going along as well. So unlike the mask order, where we saw a whole bunch of counties dissent, I don't know if we're necessarily going to see a whole lot of school districts dissent in this case.
Hey, Sherman, I'm going to toss that back to you. You're seeing more in eastern Kansas than we are here. I know that KCK, Blue Valley, Topeka, they kind of led the surge that we're kind of seeing right now in schools, saying, yeah, we are going to delay. Are you seeing more schools out there doing that as well now?
I think there are a lot of schools that are trying to figure out how best to proceed. I don't know that a lot of them have made those decisions yet. I think when you talk about local control, I think everybody's in favor of local control except when they're not. And, in this case, the concern is whether or not local school boards would feel political pressure or pressure from their communities to make a decision that's perhaps not guided by what health experts are saying.
Well, certainly some definite points there, Sherman. With the pandemic, though, there's been a surge in Kansans turning to the state's unemployment system for support in the face of unexpected layoffs, but also a surge in the numbers banned for committing fraud, even if they weren't trying to cheat the system. The Kansas Reflector this week learned some 400 Kansans who applied for unemployment aid during the pandemic didn't get it because they're under a 5-year ban for attempting to defraud the system. Yet many, the Reflector learned, didn't even know about these attempts. In the case of Spirit Aerosystems worker Michelle Tran, laid off in March, the Reflector reports when she filed for unemployment, she found out the Department of Labor said she'd accepted a week too much of assistance when laid off 3 years ago. Tran told the Reflector that was the first she'd heard of the overpayment. She said she pulled nearly $1,000 out of savings to pay that money back, plus interest, only to find herself banned for 5 years from getting any more aid. The Reflector looked at unemployment law in all 50 states, found more than 40 states punish errors like that with bans of a year or less, with exceptions that vary widely depending on repayment of the money or status as a repeat offender. Kansas House Speaker Ron Reichman told the Reflector he wouldn't want to diminish the penalty, but would consider adding wiggle room to allow for whether there was any intent to defraud the state. The governor had introduced a bill that would have rolled back the punishments for those who repaid the state like Tran did. Kelly said, when you talk about people for whom it was an honest mistake, I think we really need to be dealing with that on a case-by-case basis and not do a blanket punishment. That bill died in May. And Sherman, this was a major story that came from your news organization within the first few days of being out there in the public. Can you talk to us a little bit of how your news organization developed this story?
Yeah, we're a new nonprofit, independent, and nonpartisan news organization in Kansas. This is a story developed by Tim Carpenter, who worked alongside myself over at the Topeka Capital Journal for the past 16 years. It's one of those things that when this law was passed in 2013, there were a lot of pieces to that got a lot of attention at the time. They were kicking 18% of people off the unemployment lines, lowering the number of weeks that you could get assistance, those sort of things. They raised taxes to kind of boost the unemployment fund. because it had been depleted during the Great Recession. But this was an element that was just kind of on the back burner, is also included in that. And nobody really realized the impact until we have a pandemic. And, Michelle Tron is one of 200,000 Kansans who filed for unemployment claims during this pandemic. And like so many others, realized that she'll be locked out for 5 years.
And not a good place to be right now.
No, it's not. And I mean, I really want to compliment Sherman and the people at the Reflector. I was aware that Kansas state law, due to this Brownback creation back in 2013, imposed some pretty strict penalties for what the state determines to be unemployment fraud. I want to put it that way because a lot of this fraud, as their investigation reveals, is often completely accidental or even unknown to the people who perpetrate it. So, I mean, I was aware that these penalties existed, but the fact that Kansas is so out of line with so many other states, 5 whole years for what could be very, very small mistakes, and mistakes that often are the result in simple miscommunication. Considering the high number of requests for unemployment assistance, the great demand that has existed in the state of Kansas for help in the wake of the pandemic, there are a lot of people who are not clear about what their standing is insofar as receiving benefits. There's confusion about whether their addresses are correct, whether they're receiving the communication they had. My wife was let go from her job. After a couple of weeks, she started filing for unemployment insurance. She did this for an entire month, at which point she was hired back again. So she had about 6 weeks there without any money coming in. She never received any confirmation from the state. She never received any approval of any of her applications. But then 2 weeks after she started working again and she had ceased applying, all of a sudden a benefit showed up in our bank account. I mean, there's so much confusion and inconsistency in these very complicated regulations. We got to recognize that a lot of people get caught up in fraud that they truly didn't intend.
Yeah. Well, and on that note, Sherman, I know that one of the stories that was brought out was one of the lawmakers Tim spoke with actually had had this happen in her own family.
That's right. It was a Democratic member of the House, Stephanie Yeager, experienced this in her own family. And what we also heard, though, from lawmakers is kind of an agreement both from the Democratic governor and Republican leaders in saying maybe we do need to take a closer look at this on a case-by-case basis instead of having a blanket penalty, because, a lot of these do seem to be mistakes or perhaps even bureaucratic error. The state sends you a check, you don't know perhaps to send it back. And so that seems to be happening at least some of the time. There were 7,000 people who were on the 5-year ban. 400 had filed for claims, but we don't know the circumstances of each of those.
No. Well, certainly a very in-depth story there with a lot of interesting information.
Yeah, and important information.
Yes, very important information. Another story that is also on the Reflector and pretty much every other news agency in the market would be what's going on with the 2nd Congressional District. We're just 2 weeks away from the August primary. It's a bad time for a sitting congressman to face legal troubles. Even as Representative Steve Watkins is trying to get felony charges related to alleged voter fraud dismissed, we're learning more about what prosecutors say he did. Court papers filed in the case against Steve Watkins this last Monday say the freshman congressman misled a sheriff's detective by blaming staff for a problem with his state voter registration form. That's according to the Associated Press. It says he then couldn't remember which staffer it was. Watkins listed a postal box at a UPS store in Topeka as his personal residence when he registered to vote in 2019. Watkins called the charges bogus and filed to have the local district attorney disqualified from the case, saying he has a conflict of interest because the DA shares a direct mail provider with Watkins' opponent in the primary, State Treasurer Jake LaTurner. The AP reports that prosecutors call those arguments superficial, saying the DA has only met LaTurner once in passing. LaTurner has accused Watkins of, quote, spinning lies and blaming others. Well, and it kind of feels like Watkins has jumped from one fire to another ever since his first run for office 2 years ago. Is this the fire that finally is too much for voters?
In the era of Trump, I don't think you ever want to say, oh, is this the scandal that is finally going to end things? Because we honestly don't know. When you set up this story, you said, let's find out what's going on in the 2nd District. And my instinct was to say, what isn't going on in the 2nd District? You've had powerful individuals in the Kansas Republican Party, including former Governor Jeff Collier, who have directly intervened in the 2nd District race, calling out Steve Watkins, saying that he's a poor representative, that the Republican Party can do better, that Kansas can do better. This was happening months ago, long before the particular race really got ramped up. There's been all sorts of whispers about Watkins and actions that he has taken or hasn't taken in Washington, D.C. There's been similar whispers amongst people on the Republican side challenging Watkins. Like this one example, I mean, digging up this really fairly obscure, vote violation that he supposedly committed. I can only assume that there's a lot of personal animosity being generated amongst the Republicans within the 2nd District for things to have gotten this intense in such a short period of time.
Well, and Sherman, this is your part of the state. What are you hearing from voters there about this race?
It's a little hard to gauge what voters are making of all of this, and there are attacks coming from both sides. I think it's important to remember, though, that, LaTurner is the candidate sort of chosen by forces within the party. He was pressured to leave the Senate race and to go into this race and be the guy to make it a one-on-one match in the primary with Steve Watkins. 2 years ago, Watkins prevailed in a field of 6 or 7 candidates where none of them were particularly well known, and he was able to spend an awful lot of money during the primary to get name recognition out and barely prevail. This is going to be a much tougher race for him, going up against somebody who's better known and supported throughout the party by some of the powerful figures in the party, being LaTurner. And so it's, I think one of the questions for voters is, how much does all of this baggage weigh on Watkins? Kansas voters traditionally have started to turn away from those who seem to be surrounded by drama. Eventually we see this with people like Phil Klein. We saw Chris Kobach lose the governor's race 2 years ago. And you just have to wonder if this is the moment where people say, let's go with the safe candidate in the 2nd District.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you brought up the Senate race there, Sherman, because that's where we're headed next. In the Senate race this week, it was the vote that could swing the race. Maybe. In a series of tweets, retiring Kansas Senator Pat Roberts announced this week he had voted for Roger Marshall as his replacement, saying, "As a Ronald Reagan Republican, I always am mindful of his edict to speak no ill of any fellow Republican, and that will not change in this election." But then added he has the same choices to make as any other Kansas voter in the Republican primary, featuring Congressman Roger Marshall, former Secretary of State Chris Kobach, KC businessman Bob Hamilton, and former KC chief Dave Lindstrom, among others. Roberts finished, "Today, I marked my advance ballot for Roger Marshall." This endorsement follows that of other prominent Kansas Republicans, including former Senator Bob Dole, who also held this seat. This also comes as the other 3 main candidates for the seat are attacking Marshall for not participating in debates across the state with them, after they broke from promises to only participate in Republican Party-sponsored debates because they said the party was structuring the final event to favor Marshall. "We expected that," Chris Kobach told the KC Talk radio station this week. "The D.C. establishment has been panicking lately, so we knew it was just a matter of time before they asked Roberts to endorse him." So, Russell, it's not unusual for a retiring senator to endorse the next person to take the seat, but I get the feeling that this endorsement was really not expected.
I think that what you have to consider here is, well, let me put it this way. I would disagree with Kobach's claim that this is the DC establishment that's rattled. I think it's the Kansas establishment that's rattled. I mean, I'm sure that Mitch McConnell and other major players on the national Republican scene, particularly in regards to the Senate, are watching Kansas closely. But primarily, this is a matter of the Kansas Republican Party, and this is Sam Brownback, and this is Jeff Collier, and this is all of the transformations and challenges that the Kansas Republican Party has faced over the last 4 years. It's really easy to see those connections, or at least I think it's really easy to see those connections, because Chris Kobach has been central to all of them. Chris Kobach, in a very closely contested nomination race against then Governor Jeff Collier, wins the gubernatorial nomination, loses in 2018. Now he's making a very, very strong run for the Senate nomination. And you have the establishment party within Kansas lining up behind Roger Marshall, trying to insist that Chris Kobach is not the Republican that we want to have running. I don't know if I necessarily expected for Roberts himself to get involved, because in so many ways he's kind of already finished his career in politics. But, if they can bring Bob Dole out of retirement to make an endorsement, then certainly the current serving senator can go ahead and make one as well.
Yeah. Well, and I know you and I have talked before about Marshall having some issues with recognition, in particular in eastern Kansas. So, Sherman, I want to check in with you. Is Marshall starting to make headway as far as recognition as a major candidate there, or is he kind of still this unknown name?
I think people know who Roger Marshall is, but I think that it's difficult to compare with Chris Kobach, who's kind of notorious across Kansas. And so I think that there's that challenge for Roger Marshall. I do think that Republicans in Kansas are terrified of the idea of losing the seat. The last time a Democrat won a Senate race in Kansas was 1932, and they look at the money that Senator Barbara Boyer has raised, State Senator Barbara Boyer has raised. She's the presumed Democratic nominee for that race. And they look at what happened with Kobach in 2018 in the statewide race with Kelly. There's a growing sense that, perhaps Boyer could run the Kelly playbook, which is saturate the vote in Johnson County in Northeast Kansas and come out on top. And so I think that's driving a lot of support for Roger Marshall.
Yeah, certainly some points that we've brought up here before.
I mean, Roger Marshall is running as the candidate who is not Chris Kobach. Obviously he is doing things to try to build up his own brand. He has tried to, greatly expand whatever minimal evidence there is out there of him being close to the president and him being a favorite of Trump's and him being, a real warrior on behalf of conservative causes, which is not to say that he wouldn't be such a warrior or that he doesn't have those beliefs. But, as Sherman pointed out, there's no way anybody in Kansas can compare to the presence that Chris Kobach has built for himself over the years.
Now, he's almost more of a national figure than
local.
Right,
and explicitly in connection with President Trump. So yes, Marshall wants to try to capture some of that, but mostly what he wants to do is remind people that there are Republicans in Kansas that will not vote for Chris Kobach. It happened in 2018. It will happen again in 2020. That's his message. Whether that's true or not remains to be seen. But that is clearly what his campaign for this nomination is focused on, that he's not this person that will lead the Republican Party to defeat.
Well, we've got one other thing to talk about tonight, whether it's a career in politics or in the court. Kansas law students are preparing for the bar exam next week, but some worry about catching the coronavirus in the process. KSN's Carly Willis this week reported about safety concerns among some law students who will have to gather in groups to take the proctored bar exam that would allow them to practice law in the state. The exams are set to take place at the KU campus, which currently has a no events policy in place due to the pandemic. The test lasts 2 days, and over 100 students are registered to take them, including some out-of-state students. 2 bar examinees spoke with KSN about their concerns. The station didn't share their names because they feared pushback for speaking out.
It's not about not wanting to take a test and being scared of taking the test. It's about being scared about a deadly virus that we don't know enough about to feel confident.
We want to be able to actually go start the jobs that we've been offered or use that bar license to find a job, because we've got loan payments coming due in a couple of months. We've got people have families that are relying on them to support them.
As a group, the students have written to the Kansas Board of Law Examiners asking it to institute what's called diploma privilege, allowing those with just law degrees from accredited schools to practice without having to take a bar exam, something some states like Wisconsin have been doing for years. And the university does have some safety measures in place, things like delayed start, caps on how many people can be in a room, staggered starts, mask requirements. But Sherman, that part of the state is still in a surge right now.
It is. We talked to an appellate public defender in Kansas who said there's just no perfect solution for how to handle this. The students are saying, let us, have some flexibility to allow us to go to work under certain conditions if we meet certain standards, and not have to all gather, over 100 people in a tight space to take this test. There was dispute about, why do we all have to be in one area and not individual rooms anyway? The folks who are administering the test say that they will maintain 6 feet of distancing and all the guidelines, but clearly there's some uncertainty here.
Yeah, definitely. And this is just kind of a personal thing on my part. I've always wondered why, after going through all of the effort to get the law degree, you then still have to pass another test.
I mean, that's just the way that the legal profession developed. In regards to this particular issue, just real quickly, remember that the KU Med School allowed its graduates to finish early and leave and go into the field and start doing work. So, I mean, that's an important precedent that people can keep in mind.
And not just leave early, but they didn't have to take their boards either.
Right.
Yeah, which is a similar situation to
Exactly.
legal issues. Well, Sherman, Russell, thank you both so much for joining me this week. We'd also like to thank our news partners at KSN News, Cake News, and the Wichita Eagle for sharing their materials with us. We'd love to continue this conversation with you on social media. Just look for Pilar Pedraza TV or KPTS Channel 8 on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. For now, stay safe and have a great week.
Southwest National Bank has proudly served Wichita and its surrounding communities for over 100 years. We are happy to support KPTS, Public Television for Kansas.